The Rife frequency machine. In the summer of 1934, inside a clinical research facility in La Jolla, California, a group of terminally ill cancer patients gathered for what would become one of the most controversial medical trials in American history. 16 people, all diagnosed with incurable malignancies, all given months to live, submitted themselves to a treatment that involved no surgery, no radiation, no chemotherapy, only frequency, only light. Within 90 days, 14 of them were declared cancer-free by independent physicians. The device responsible was called the Rife frequency machine, and within a decade, it would be legally erased from existence. Dr. Royal Raymond Rife was not a fringe experimenter. He was a gifted microscopist and electrical engineer who had developed what he called the universal microscope, an optical instrument capable of magnifying objects up to 60,000 times their size using light frequencies rather than electron beams. Where conventional microscopes killed specimens through heat and radiation, Rife's allowed him to observe living viruses in real time. And what he claimed to see changed everything. Each pathogen he discovered vibrated at a specific electromagnetic frequency. And if you could match that frequency and amplify it, you could shatter the organism, like a soprano's voice breaking glass. The Rife machine operated on this principle. Using plasma tubes filled with noble gases, the device emitted precise electromagnetic frequencies targeted at specific diseases. The patient would sit near the machine, exposed to these invisible waves, while the frequencies, Rife claimed, destroyed only the pathogenic cells, leaving healthy tissue untouched. No side effects, no invasiveness, just resonance calibrated to kill. Rife documented his work meticulously, filming his results, recording frequencies, and partnering with respected medical doctors. In 1934, the University of Southern California appointed a special medical research committee to oversee a clinical trial. The results, according to surviving documents, were extraordinary. Cancer, tuberculosis, even polio responded to the treatment. Then the attacks began. In 1939, nearly all of Rife's research documents were stolen from his lab. His microscopes were vandalized. Colleagues who had supported his work began receiving threats, and one by one, they distanced themselves publicly. Dr. Milbank Johnson, who had overseen the 1934 trial, was preparing to announce the results at a press conference when he died suddenly the night before. Official cause: heart attack. The announcement never happened. By the 1950s, the American Medical Association and the FDA launched coordinated legal actions. Rife's machines were declared fraudulent medical devices. Clinics using them were raided, equipment was confiscated and destroyed under court order. Rife himself was harassed, his lab repeatedly broken into, his finances drained by lawsuits. In 1961, he was briefly jailed for refusing to cease his research. By 1971, Rife died in obscurity, alcoholic and broken. No working Rife machine exists today. Attempts to reconstruct the device using his notes have failed. Key frequency lists are missing, schematics are incomplete, and critical components are either unavailable or their specifications unknown. Modern researchers claim they've replicated his results, but none have survived peer review or regulatory scrutiny. The official position remains: the Rife machine never worked. But 14 cancer patients in 1934 might have disagreed. If they hadn't been silenced too, the Cloudbuster weather control device. On a humid afternoon in July 1953, in the desert outskirts of Tucson, Arizona, a strange tower stood against the sky. It resembled an anti-aircraft gun, but its barrels pointed not at planes. They pointed at clouds. Dr. Wilhelm Reich stood beside it, notebook in hand, watching as the device's hollow tubes, grounded into water, began their work. Within hours, rain fell in a region that hadn't seen precipitation in weeks. Local farmers called it a miracle. The US government called it something else, a threat. Reich was no stranger to controversy. An Austrian psychoanalyst and former colleague of Sigmund Freud, he had fled Nazi Europe and settled in America, where his interest shifted from psychology to biophysics. His obsession became what he termed orgone energy, a hypothetical universal life force that he claimed permeated all matter and space. To most scientists, it sounded like mysticism. But Reich wasn't theorizing in abstracts. He was building machines. The Cloudbuster was his most ambitious creation, a weather manipulation device designed to attract and disperse orgone energy concentrated in the atmosphere. According to Reich's theory, droughts occurred when dead orgone energy, which he called DOR, accumulated in the sky, blocking the flow of moisture. The Cloudbuster's metal tubes, he claimed, could draw this energy down into water, neutralizing it and allowing natural weather patterns to resume. Reich conducted multiple tests, some of which were observed by independent witnesses, including farmers, journalists, and even a few skeptical scientists. In 1953, blueberry farmers in Maine, desperate after a prolonged drought, hired Reich to attempt rainmaking. Reich deployed the Cloudbuster. Rain fell within days. The farmers paid him. Reports spread. But the more attention Reich attracted, the more scrutiny followed. By 1954, the FDA had begun investigating Reich, not for weather control, but for his orgone accumulators, box-like devices he claimed could concentrate orgone energy for therapeutic purposes. The FDA declared orgone energy a fraud and obtained a federal injunction banning the sale, distribution, and even discussion of orgone-related materials. Reich refused to comply. He considered the injunction an assault on scientific inquiry and ignored it entirely. In 1956, an associate violated the injunction by transporting an orgone accumulator across state lines. Reich was held in contempt of court. That same year, FDA agents raided Reich's laboratory in Rangeley, Maine. They seized his equipment, burned his books, literally incinerating tons of research material, journals, and publications in a public furnace. Even his personal correspondence was destroyed. Reich was sentenced to 2 years in federal prison. On November 3rd, 1957, he died in his cell at Lewisburg Penitentiary. The official cause, heart failure. He was 60 years old. The Cloudbuster was dismantled. Its schematics, buried in Reich's banned publications, were lost to legal flames. Attempts to reconstruct the device have been met with ridicule, dismissed as pseudoscience. Yet the question remains, why did the US government feel threatened enough by a weather machine to burn a man's life work? If it didn't work, why not just ignore it? And if it did work, who decides whether humanity is allowed to control the rain? The suppressed carburetor. In 1977, on a desolate highway outside El Paso, Texas, a modified 1970 Ford Galaxy rolled to a stop after traveling over 200 miles on 2 gallons of gasoline. No electric assist, no hybrid technology, just a re-engineered carburetor designed by a 24-year-old mechanic named Tom Ogle. Journalists rode in the car. Engineers examined the engine. The fuel economy was independently verified. Then Ogle filed for a patent, and that's when the trouble began. Tom Ogle was a high school dropout with an intuitive grasp of internal combustion. His design was deceptively simple. Instead of vaporizing fuel through a traditional carburetor, his system heated gasoline into a vapor using engine heat, mixed it with air in a pressurized chamber, and fed it directly into the cylinders. The result was near-complete fuel combustion. No waste, no excess emissions, and fuel efficiency that shattered every industry standard. His patent, US number 4,177,779, was granted in 1979. Major media outlets covered the story. Shell Oil sent representatives to observe a demonstration. Investors appeared, offering millions. But Ogle refused to sell outright. He wanted licensing deals, not buyouts. He wanted the carburetor in production cars, not buried in a corporate vault. That decision may have cost him everything. By 1981, Ogle's prototype had vanished from public demonstrations. Investors who'd promised funding suddenly withdrew. His business partner was killed in a suspicious plane crash. Ogle himself grew paranoid, claiming he was being followed, that his phone was tapped, that oil industry representatives had made veiled threats. Friends dismissed it as stress. Then, in August 1981, Tom Ogle was found dead in his apartment, slumped over with a bottle of alcohol and pills scattered nearby. The official ruling: accidental overdose. He was 26 years old. The carburetor design, despite being patented, never reached production. No automaker licensed the technology. Attempts by independent mechanics to replicate Ogle's results using the patent documents have consistently failed. The specifications, though public, seem incomplete. Critical details about chamber pressure, vapor temperature, and fuel mixture ratios are either vague or missing entirely. Some claim Ogle deliberately omitted key information to protect himself. Others suggest the patent was altered after his death. Today, the average car gets 25 miles per gallon. Tom Ogle's Ford got over 100. His patent still exists, filed and verified. Yet no vehicle on the road uses it. If the technology was fraudulent, why issue the patent? And if it was real, who benefits most from ensuring it never leaves the page? The electrolytic carburetor. In 1983, inside a modest garage in Malala, Oregon, inventor Paul Pantone started an engine using nothing but water, or so he claimed. The device he'd built, later known as the GEET fuel processor, wasn't magic. It was a retrofitted internal combustion engine with a radically altered fuel intake system. Instead of gasoline entering the carburetor directly, it passed through a superheated reaction chamber where it mixed with water vapor, creating a plasma-like state that somehow allowed the engine to run on a fuel blend that was up to 80% water. Pantone filmed it. He demonstrated it publicly. He filed for a patent. Then the government stepped in. Paul Pantone was a machinist with decades of experience in automotive and industrial systems. His GEET processor, Global Environmental Energy Technology, operated on principles that seemed to violate thermodynamics. The core component was a stainless steel rod surrounded by a magnetic field, housed within an exhaust-heated tube. Fuel and water vapor passed around this rod, undergoing what Pantone described as molecular dissociation and plasma reformation. The process allegedly broke down complex hydrocarbons, allowing even contaminated or low-grade fuels to combust efficiently. Independent tests conducted in the 1990s by small engineering firms reported engines running smoothly on mixtures that should have flooded and stalled. Pantone's work attracted attention. He secured U.S. patent number 5,794,601 in 1998. Universities expressed interest. Environmental groups hailed it as a breakthrough for reducing emissions. But then reports surfaced that his technology had come to the attention of the Department of Energy. In 2005, Pantone was arrested, not for fraud, but for securities violations related to how he'd promoted investment in his company. The details were murky. The trial brief. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison and declared mentally incompetent, committed to a psychiatric facility in Utah, despite no prior history of mental illness. While incarcerated, Pantone's patents were flagged under a secrecy order, an obscure legal mechanism allowing the government to classify privately held patents if deemed relevant to national security. His technology, once open source, became restricted. Researchers attempting to access detailed schematics found files redacted or removed from public databases. By the time Pantone was released in 2011, his health had deteriorated. He gave few interviews and died in 2015, largely forgotten. The GEET processor remains in a legal gray zone. The patent exists, but is encumbered. Replication attempts report bizarre failures. Engines that run briefly, then seize. Rods that fracture under conditions they shouldn't, and in some cases, harassment from regulatory agencies citing emissions violations. If water could power engines, the oil economy collapses. And perhaps that's exactly why Paul Pantone spent his final years behind bars and in silence. The free energy magnet motor. On April 24, 1979, the United States Patent Office did something extraordinary. It granted patent number 4,151,431 to an inventor named Howard Johnson for a permanent magnet motor. Not a prototype, not a theoretical design, a working motor that, according to the patent's claims, could produce rotational energy indefinitely using only the repelling force of strategically arranged magnets. No fuel, no external power source, just magnets pushing against each other in a carefully orchestrated sequence that defied everything the physics establishment claimed was possible. The patent was valid, the device was real, and it has never been commercially produced. Howard Johnson was a physicist and inventor with a background in magnetism and electromagnetic theory. His motor wasn't perpetual motion. It didn't violate thermodynamics, he insisted. Instead, it tapped into the potential energy stored within magnetic fields, releasing it gradually through geometric arrangement and material selection. The design involved curved permanent magnets positioned along a rotor and stator, aligned so that their repelling forces created continuous rotational torque. Johnson demonstrated working prototypes to engineers, patent examiners, and journalists. In 1980, he appeared on a television program, showing a small motor spinning without batteries, without wires, without any detectable energy input. The patent approval was rigorous. Examiners demanded proof. Johnson provided it. Multiple witnesses signed affidavits confirming the motor's operation. The device was filmed, measured, and tested. It wasn't a magic trick. It was engineering. Yet within months of the patent's issuance, Johnson encountered a wall of resistance. Corporations that initially expressed interest suddenly went silent. Licensing negotiations collapsed without explanation. His funding dried up. Investors who'd committed capital withdrew, citing technical concerns they refused to elaborate on. Johnson spent the next 2 decades attempting to bring his motor to market. He refined the design, built improved prototypes, and sought partnerships with manufacturers. None materialized. He accused unnamed entities of sabotage, equipment failures during demonstrations, sudden changes in material suppliers, and rejection letters from venture capital firms that all contained eerily similar phrasing. In 2008, Howard Johnson died. His motor died with him. The patent remains publicly accessible. Anyone can view the diagrams, read the specifications, attempt replication. Yet no one has successfully commercialized the design. DIY experimenters report consistent failures. Magnets that demagnetize prematurely. Rotors that require just enough external push to keep spinning. Materials that don't match the patent's descriptions. Some claim Johnson intentionally omitted critical details. Others suggest the patent was altered post-publication. What's undeniable is this: a valid US patent exists for a device that, if functional, would obliterate the energy industry, and it has been commercially silent for over 40 years. If it didn't work, why grant the patent? And if it did, who benefits from its absence? The sonic flame suppression device. In 2012, inside a DARPA-funded laboratory, 2 engineering students from George Mason University achieved something firefighters had dreamed of for decades. They extinguished an open flame using nothing but sound. No water, no foam, no chemical suppressants, just precisely tuned acoustic waves directed at a fire, disrupting the combustion process at its core. The demonstration was filmed. The results were published. DARPA took immediate interest. Then, abruptly, the research went dark. The device, developed by Viet Tran and Seth Robertson, was deceptively simple in concept. Using a handheld speaker powered by an amplifier, they generated low-frequency sound waves between 30 and 60 Hz, aimed directly at flames. The acoustic pressure separated oxygen molecules from the fuel source, breaking the fire triangle and causing instant extinguishment. In tests, they put out alcohol fires, wood fires, and even gasoline blazes within seconds. The technology required no heavy equipment, posed no environmental hazards, and could be deployed in spaces where water or chemicals would cause more damage than the fire itself. Server rooms, lithium battery fires, spacecraft. The innovation caught immediate attention. DARPA's Young Faculty Award funded further development. Media outlets covered the breakthrough. Fire safety experts hailed it as revolutionary, particularly for fighting electrical fires where traditional methods were dangerous or ineffective. But then the updates stopped. The university's public research page went offline. Follow-up interviews with Tran and Robertson became impossible to schedule. Patent filings that should have followed never appeared in public databases. By 2015, rumors began circulating that the sonic suppression technology had been classified under national security provisions. No official statement was ever released, but defense industry insiders suggested the device had applications beyond firefighting. Potential uses in crowd control, non-lethal weapons, or disrupting explosive combustion in military contexts. If true, civilian development would be legally frozen under secrecy orders that prohibit even the inventors from discussing their own work. Attempts by independent researchers to replicate the sonic extinguisher have produced mixed results. Some report modest success with small fires, but nothing approaching the efficiency shown in the original 2012 videos. Others encounter inexplicable equipment failures or are unable to source the specific acoustic components needed. Fire departments that expressed initial interest in testing the technology report being told it's not yet available for commercial application. No timeline has been provided. Today, firefighters still carry water hoses and foam tanks. Buildings still burn. Lives are still lost. Yet somewhere, in a classified facility, a device exists that could change everything. If sound can extinguish fire, why isn't it in every fire station? Unless, of course, someone decided it shouldn't be. The hemp decorticator machine. In February 1938, Popular Mechanics magazine published an article titled New Billion-Dollar Crop. The crop wasn't corn or wheat. It was hemp, and the machine that made it viable, the Schlichten decorticator, was poised to revolutionize American agriculture and manufacturing. The device could process hemp fiber faster and cheaper than any method before it, turning the plant into raw material for paper, textiles, plastics, and building materials. Farmers called it the future. Then, later that same year, the Marijuana Tax Act passed, and industrial hemp became functionally illegal. The decorticator, despite its economic promise, vanished from American farms overnight. The Schlichten decorticator was an engineering marvel. Designed by George Schlichten in the early 1930s, the machine automated the labor-intensive process of separating hemp's woody core from its valuable outer fiber. Before the decorticator, hemp processing required extensive manual labor, making it expensive and slow. Schlichten's invention changed that. It could process 1 ton of hemp per hour, producing fiber so clean and uniform that it outperformed cotton in strength and paper in durability. Hemp paper didn't yellow. Hemp fabric outlasted cotton. Hemp could even be converted into biodegradable plastics. The machine made all of this economically feasible for the first time in industrial history. Investors took notice. Manufacturers placed orders. The U.S. Department of Agriculture praised hemp as a rotation crop that improved soil health and required no pesticides. Henry Ford even built a prototype car with hemp-based plastic panels, stronger than steel and far lighter. The decorticator was positioned to make hemp America's most profitable agricultural product. But powerful industries saw a threat. Cotton growers, who relied on subsidies and cheap labor, couldn't compete with hemp's yield per acre. Timber companies, who supplied wood pulp for paper, faced obsolescence. And synthetic fiber manufacturers, DuPont had just patented nylon, stood to lose billions if natural hemp fabrics dominated the market. Then came the propaganda. Hemp, despite being non-psychoactive industrial cannabis, was lumped into the same legal category as marijuana. The Marijuana Tax Act of 1938, heavily influenced by lobbying from DuPont, Hearst, and other industrial interests, imposed prohibitive taxes and regulations on all cannabis cultivation. Growing hemp became legally impossible without expensive permits that were rarely granted. The decorticator, now unable to process a banned crop, was rendered useless. Machines were dismantled. Schlichten's company collapsed. During World War II, hemp was briefly re-legalized under the Hemp for Victory campaign to produce rope and fabric for the military. But after the war, prohibition returned, and the decorticator remained dormant. Today, industrial hemp is legal again in the US, but the Schlichten decorticator no longer exists No modern equivalent has achieved its efficiency. The original blueprints are incomplete, and the machine that could have reshaped American industry was legally erased, not because it failed, but because it succeeded too well. The Phoebus Cartel light bulb. In a Livermore, California fire station, a single light bulb has burned continuously since 1901. Over 120 years without replacement. No burnout. No failure. This bulb, manufactured by the Shelby Electric Company, is not an anomaly of luck. It is proof that electric light bulbs were once engineered to last indefinitely. But in 1924, something changed. The world's largest light bulb manufacturers met in Geneva and signed an agreement that would intentionally shorten the lifespan of every bulb produced. They called it standardization. History calls it the Phoebus Cartel, and it became the blueprint for planned obsolescence. Before 1924, light bulbs routinely lasted 2,500 hours or more. Some, like the Centennial bulb, were built with carbon filaments and hand-blown glass that could endure decades of continuous use. Manufacturers competed on durability, and engineers took pride in creating products that didn't fail. But longer-lasting bulbs meant fewer sales. The industry faced a problem. Satisfied customers weren't repeat customers. So the world's major manufacturers, General Electric, Osram, Philips, and others, formed a secret alliance. They agreed to cap bulb lifespan at 1,000 hours, not as a technical limitation, but as a business strategy. The cartel didn't just recommend this limit, they enforced it. Internal documents, discovered decades later, reveal a system of fines and penalties imposed on any member company whose bulbs exceeded the 1,000-hour threshold. Engineers who designed longer-lasting filaments were reprimanded. Production standards were deliberately altered to ensure premature failure. Filament thickness was reduced. Glass quality was downgraded. The changes were subtle but effective. By 1940, the average bulb lifespan had dropped to under 1,000 hours, and consumers accepted it as normal. The Phoebus Cartel operated until World War II disrupted international cooperation, but its legacy endured. The 1,000-hour standard became so deeply embedded in manufacturing that even after the cartel dissolved, no company returned to producing long-life bulbs for general consumers. The practice of designing products to fail, planned obsolescence, spread to other industries: appliances, electronics, automobiles. What began with light bulbs became a foundational principle of modern capitalism. Attempts to reintroduce long-life incandescent bulbs have met resistance. In some cases, regulations citing energy efficiency have banned traditional incandescents entirely, pushing consumers toward LEDs and CFLs, technologies with longer lifespans, but also higher costs and complex electronics that still fail. The Centennial bulb still glows, a relic of an era when things were built to last. Its existence is a quiet accusation. We once knew how to make light bulbs that never burned out. We chose not to, and that choice, formalized by legal agreement, reshaped the entire economy around consumption and waste. The question is not whether we could build better, it's whether we're allowed to. The Vortex water engine. In 1945, as Allied forces swept through Austria in the final days of World War II, a special intelligence unit diverted from the main advance to a remote workshop in Bad Ischl. Their target wasn't a weapons facility or Nazi command post. It was the laboratory of Victor Schauberger, an Austrian forest warden turned inventor, whose work on water dynamics had allegedly produced an engine that defied conventional physics. According to seized documents, Schauberger had built a turbine that generated thrust through implosion rather than explosion, a device that could theoretically power aircraft without combustion, using only water and air. The Allies confiscated everything: prototypes, blueprints, notebooks. Schauberger was detained and interrogated. His life's work disappeared into classified vaults, and he would never see it again. Victor Schauberger was no academic physicist. He was a naturalist who spent decades observing water flow in alpine streams, studying how trout could hold position in torrential currents or leap up waterfalls with minimal effort. He concluded that water, when allowed to move in natural spiraling vortices, exhibited properties science hadn't yet quantified: temperature anomalies, density changes, and energy accumulation. His engine designs attempted to mimic these natural patterns. Water and air would spiral inward through specially curved copper tubes, creating a centripetal force, an implosion that generated suction and thrust without heat or combustion. Schauberger built multiple prototypes in the 1940s, some allegedly tested in secret by the German government. Witnesses described seeing devices levitate or produce powerful rotational forces with no visible energy input. Whether these accounts were exaggerated or suppressed remains unknown, because all physical evidence was seized. After the war, Schauberger tried to rebuild. He secured limited funding and continued refining his theories. But in 1958, he was invited to the United States by a private consortium promising development support. Instead, he was pressured to sign over all patent rights and contractual control of his inventions. Fluent in German but not English, Schauberger signed documents he didn't fully understand. He returned to Austria broken. 5 days later, on September 25, 1958, Victor Schauberger died. His final words, according to his son, were, "They took everything from me. Everything." His patents, now held by American interests, were never commercialized. Attempts to reconstruct his vortex engines using surviving sketches and second-hand descriptions have universally failed. The precise geometries, materials, compositions, and operational sequences remain unknown or classified. Today, we power turbines through combustion and explosion, controlled violence. Schauberger proposed the opposite, harnessing nature's spiraling calm. If his engines worked, they would have rendered fossil fuels obsolete. And perhaps that's exactly why, in 1945, they were legally and physically erased from history. The zero-point energy harvester. Between 1951 and 2024, over 5,000 privately held patents have been classified under the Inventions Secrecy Act, a federal law allowing the U.S. government to suppress any invention deemed a threat to national security. The inventors are legally prohibited from developing, discussing, or even disclosing the existence of their own work. Violation carries criminal penalties. Among these buried patents, one category appears with disturbing frequency: devices claiming to extract energy from the quantum vacuum, what physicists call zero-point energy. At least a dozen inventors, working independently across different decades, filed patents for machines that allegedly harvested limitless power from empty space itself. None were ever commercialized. All were seized under secrecy orders. And the inventors, when they spoke at all, warned of the same thing. They were told that if such technology became public, it would destabilize civilization. Zero-point energy is not pseudoscience. It's a recognized phenomenon in quantum mechanics, the baseline energy that exists even in a perfect vacuum, where particles constantly fluctuate in and out of existence. Mainstream physics acknowledges it exists but considers it untappable, or at least impractical to harness. Yet multiple inventors claimed otherwise. In the 1970s, inventor Bruce De Palma developed what he called the N machine, a magnetized gyroscope that allegedly produced electrical output exceeding input. In the 1980s, Floyd Sweet demonstrated a device using conditioned magnets that reportedly generated kilowatts of power from milliwatts of input. In the 1990s, inventor Dennis Lee attracted crowds to demonstrations of energy devices he claimed violated known thermodynamic limits. Each followed the same trajectory: initial demonstrations, media coverage, patent filings. Then, silence. De Palma's work was dismissed as measurement error. Sweet's device mysteriously stopped functioning, and he died shortly after under unclear circumstances. Lee was arrested for fraud and securities violations, though his actual devices were never publicly debunked, simply removed from circulation. Independent researchers attempting to replicate these results encounter legal threats, equipment seizures, or are visited by government officials warning them to cease operations under national security statutes. The Inventions Secrecy Act of 1951 remains active. The number of suppressed patents grows each year. No congressional oversight reviews which inventions are classified or why. No appeals process exists for inventors. They are simply informed their work is now property of the state, forbidden from discussing it, sometimes offered token compensation, or coerced into silence through more persuasive means. If zero-point energy is fantasy, why classify the patents? If these devices don't work, why not allow them to fail in the marketplace? Unless they do work. And if infinite, free energy exists, extractable from the fabric of space itself, then every power structure on Earth, every economy, every empire built on scarcity and control faces immediate obsolescence. Perhaps that's the real reason these patents are buried, not to protect national security, but to protect the system that decides who gets power and who does not.